Well, welcome and good evening, wonderful dice of all alignments. I am Lunar D8, and this is Let's Play Crimson Gray, Dusk and Dawn Blind, Part 1. This is the sequel to Crimson Gray, which I literally just got done playing a couple minutes ago. But I wanted to keep going. Yes, I know I was supposed to go to sleep or drink a soda pop, but I have a bad habit of being addicted to any kind of story or novel, whether it's written or a visual novel. Visual novel, of course, with great music. And that was one thing with this. I went into the game not knowing much about it, other than it basically was like, hey, you like Doki Doki Literature Club? You're going to like this. I even made a joke saying it was like Doki Doki Literature Club 2. Now, I will say this, and I'll say it in every single part of this series for Crimson Gray, Dusk and Dawn. If you have not seen the playlist where I did the original Crimson Gray, go watch that first. You need to watch that before you watch these. Now, that being said, this is a sequel to that. So, again, going in blind, but I at least know, because I went and completed everything, and I 100%ed everything in the other game. I'm sure there might have been some other paths I could possibly do by it. I got all the Steam achievements, and I got the true canon ending. So, we're going to see how did their life go on after everything happened. But like I said, if you haven't seen the other video, the original Crimson Gray, go watch my playlist of that first, so you can follow on. But yeah, let's see what the new story holds for us. Author's note, this game is a direct sequel to the original Crimson Gray, and will make less sense if you don't play the first one. I just got done saying that. Review the story so far? I'll go play the first one then! I played the first one. Well, I did play the first one, but maybe a coherent summary would make sense, since I am anything but coherent. Review the story. John was a high school student struggling with depression, slowly losing his will to continue and drifting further away from his peers, until he met Lizzie. Though Lizzie was violent and unstable, she claimed that she loved him, and over time, John began to believe that she truly did, and that she was simply struggling with problems of her own. That's a good picture, though. Their personal struggles intertwined with one another, supporting each other and slowly reaching towards something like healthy stability. I never got to see that note last time. But it became clear that Lizzie's condition was no mere phase. She was unstable because her mother had participated in an experiment by a corporation called Koitek. John came to realize that Lizzie would never be a normal girl, even if he accepted her love, and worse, Koitek was becoming aware of Lizzie's existence, and not about to let her go easily. Female Kratos. Turns out, Kratos, you don't fight Kratos. Kratos will wreck your shit. It did not end well. Ask the Greek gods, and the Norse gods. How did it work for them when they challenged Kratos? It didn't. When it came to the moment of truth, John accepted Lizzie as she was, even with her instability. This is recording, right? Yes. Yep, looks that way. When it came to the moment, stability. They managed to escape Koitek and run away together. But though they had escaped the reach of Koitek, can they actually build a life together when things are peaceful? Can Lizzie remain stable when there isn't a threat to her to fight? Can she be a truly supportive partner to John? This is what this story is about. Okay, my achievement is college days. Melancholy mellow echoed within her, and Lizzie clung to it. She's sad? Why is she sad? What is happening? We're in college together. Okay. There was a time when the melody... Am I playing as Lizzie in this one? Like last time I was playing from the perspective of John. Am I Lizzie this time around? And is she kind of depressed now? There was a time when the melody hadn't been within her, though she preferred not to think about that time. That was before she met him. The melody was sad, but it was his, and so she loved it. and it was certainly better than emptiness. Lizzie had expected that meeting her special person would change everything, and it had, but to her surprise, it hadn't happened all at once. Instead, they both grew and changed, their life together becoming ever more wonderful and your mind growing to encompass it. Okay? Yet she had a difficult time pinpointing exactly when she had first heard the melody. It would have been romantic if it had appeared at some momentous occasion, such as when she met him, or when they first made love, or on some future day when they were finally married. But instead it had slowly emerged, whispering at the edges of her mind. Smiling to herself, Lizzie began to contemplate the beginnings of the melody more thoroughly, but at that moment her world was disrupted by two people approaching her. "Hi!" Her eyes flickered over their substanceless bodies, analyzing everything about them. She distantly knew the girl's name, had only seen the boy on several occasions, but sophomores like John and her. No physical threat. So they'd been in college. This is their second year of college. Lizzie had seen the two of them holding hands on the campus screen. From pupil dilation, judged them to be a couple, so unlikely to be a threat to her relationship. But now they were approaching her. She put on her usual smile and considered them more carefully. The boy was normal enough, but the girl, she was rather pretty, and she dressed fairly well. It would take so little for her to try to show off what she had. Well, it's not like John would leave you. Oh, what the fuck? I like, but if I already had a girlfriend, I've never cheated on anyone, so yeah. What had a teasing glint in her eye? Lizzie smiled wide just a bit, and she reclassified the girl as a minor threat. I mean, she does look nice, but if you already have a girlfriend, what kind of bastard cheats on their partner? Hey, sorry to interrupt, it's Lizzie, right? That's right, nice to meet you. She responded politely as they introduced themselves, only tracking the information for future reference. Once putting on a friendly mask had been difficult for her, an imitation of something she'd only observed. Now she could fake it more easily, mirroring real emotions she had when she was with him. It irritated her to waste her smiles on random people who didn't matter, though as soon as it was possible, Lizzie encouraged them to get to the point. We're trying to start a social thing for other couples on the campus. They may be about the same age, but hanging out with single college kids just isn't the same, We don't have many people yet, so if you have any ideas, we're open to them. Either of you. Your husband's name is John, right? Why did she know his name? It's just his name! That is not a reason to be seeing red. But yeah, we were apparently playing as Lizzie. Lizzie's smile became brittle as she stared over at the girl again, searching for the slightest tick that might give her away. She had played it off like she wasn't sure about his name, but she knew Lizzie was sure of it. I don't know. Is this going to be like we're going to see the world through Lizzie's eyes? That's going to be very interesting, actually. We're seeing Lizzie through John's eyes. Now we're seeing the world through Lizzie's eyes. This is a very interesting idea. But I wonder how we're going to make it scary for the player in this circumstance if we're the, individual. Perhaps her... Okay, want to double check, make sure it's recording again. Yeah. Okay, perhaps her analysis of their threat was wrong. She had dismissed them as a couple, but neglected to consider how impure most love was. This girl might ignore her partner and target John. Or they could be one of those sexually adventurous couples she read about, prowling for other couples. Lizzie had not given a single real thought to the subject until that moment, when bloody hatred clawed itself out of her soul. Just as she was about to let those emotions leak onto her face, Lizzie heard the melody again, over the beating drum of her heart, sad but calm. She wasn't sure what John would say to her, but the thought of him soothed the growing rage. So we have one person who lives with crippling depression, and the other person who lives with crippling rage. So, I mean, how's that for a partnership? You know, one partner has crippling depression, the other has crippling rage. You know, I just thought of something. If Lizzie is Kratos, then John is Ulquiorra from Bleach. I've just shipped Ulquiorra and Kratos. It was also possible that the girl hadn't wanted to seem too forward, like they had been tracking them. Checking their faces more carefully, Lizzie saw hints of nervousness and forced casualness. She set aside her main concern, flagging it as a potential problem for future consideration. Only a tiny fraction of a second had passed. Lizzie gave them both an apologetic smile. That's very kind of you, but it's hard for us to have much of a social life. We're trying to get our degrees quickly. Oh, that's a shame. The offer's still open. Let your husband know, okay? Okay. With that, Lizzie brushed past them as quickly as she could, without seeming rude. Despite the potential threat and new source of danger to consider, she also felt a little warm. People thought they were married. They were often together on campus, but Lizzie had thought she had restrained the majority of her affection for when they were alone. The warmth drained away slowly as Lizzie went about her business. Though they still weren't married, John was willing to tie the knot, but the thought of it made her heart leap into her chest. It had nothing to do with the idea of being with him. Lizzie berated herself for the very thought, and everything to do with how she was sure that the wedding would draw bad luck to him somewhere. At first, she hadn't wanted to get married because she was afraid that the official record would draw Koitek down on them somehow. But over 2 years had passed since the violent incident, and it was clear that they had escaped. Enrolling in college hadn't drawn any negative attention either, so it was safe for them to get married. And yet something would go wrong, even if they didn't invite anyone. She was sure someone would ruin the day, and while no one could possibly ruin the relationship, she would only have one wedding day, and she wanted it to be perfect. Well, I think everyone wants a good wedding. Suddenly, the people around her were too many. Faceless, soulless creatures. Does she have agoraphobia, like fear of big crowds? Moving past her indifferently, the drone of their voices drowned out the melody. Stopping in place, Lizzie frowned, struggling to regain it, but his melody had drifted out of her mind, and no amount of thinking about the joy she felt with him would bring it back. Checking the time, Lizzie decided she had enough before she needed to go to class. Normally she preferred to arrive early, but that was no longer her priority. The general buzz of class, which she usually found passable, if a pale second to being with him, would now only disrupt her. It was difficult to hold herself back, but Lizzie managed to sprint across the campus no faster than an ordinary runner. This wasn't the first time that someone from the track team had actually tried to recruit her. Sorry, like I said, I went out in the snow for a little bit. But that was unacceptable. The track uniforms were flattering, but everyone would be wearing them. Of course, he would come out to the events to be supportive, but that meant his eyes would be assaulted by the entire female track team. That could not be allowed. Kill the track team? Oh god. This really did go the route of Doki Doki Literature Club. Guys, it's trying to make you feel like in her mind right now. I know you guys can't tell this because you're not here. But here's the thing. I'm moving the cursor down And even though I'm trying to force it away from it, the cursor is actually moving on its own in true Doki Doki Literature Club fashion. It's forcing the mouse on to kill the track team just to be safe. Or I could go, let it go, Lizzie. John would want you to let it go. It's trying to force me to pick the bad option. Lizzie gripped her forehead with both hands, forcing the thought away. She didn't need to do that anymore. Kill the track team just to be safe, damn. The hollowness within her eyes grew, and she left campus. Fortunately, their little apartment was nearby. A split home provided as housing for couples. It had taken serious work to obtain one despite not being married, as the fools in admissions thought there was a chance that she and John might break up. Since it was 2:52, John was likely to be reading for a class. He had preferenced the paper being due soon, but he never went down to the computer lab until he was in class. After all, he knew that she might need him. But it's just funny that there really are like Doki Doki Literature Club because the mouse is trying to move on its own to pick the bad choice. It's like, no, don't kill the entire track team. No! His consideration made a warm glow through Lizzie. I feel like Monika's returned to curse the screen. Not that I mind, Monika was actually really sexy. Sorry, I spaced out. Like I said, I know I was supposed to go to sleep, but I want to play the game. I like the story's interesting, despite being a horror thing. It's very well done. I like the music. I like the characters. It's really cool. I tend to have an addictive personality, even though I don't do drugs. But I tend to like if I watch a show or read a book, I don't want to stop. His consideration made a warm glow spread through Lizzie, but that wasn't enough. She needed to see him. She had her key in hand, and she approached the door, but it was already unlocked, almost as if he had known. Lizzie threw it open and rushed inside. Hi, John. John sat on the couch reading a textbook. He looked perfect, and when he glanced up at the noise and saw her there, gasping for breath, he just gave a comforting smile. Well, her health looks relatively normal, though it looks like there's a knife on the table, but still. Everything alright, Lizzie? Of course it is. I just forgot a book I needed for class. She swept up to him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders to give him a slow kiss. The sight of him had calmed her considerably, and Lizzie tried to keep the desperation out of the kiss. Yet this warm intimacy with him was what she needed. There was no sense giving him anything to worry about. She had found him, her perfect person. Lizzie drew back slightly and rested her forehead against his. Her heart filled with warmth, and his melody strong in her mind once again. I love you, Lizzie. It made her heart flutter just as much as the first time he said it. I'll say this, any relationship I like to hear that I love you, but I like, only if the person actually means it. I don't really care for flattery, though there's a lot of times I've gotten flattery and I believed it to be true, so I was happy about it until I found out it was just lies, and then I just felt sad. It made her heart flutter. I love you too, John, more than anything. But as happy as she was to reply, she sensed that something wasn't quite right. There was a bit of tension in his eyes. Was he carrying some weight? Depression? Had someone done something to him? No, Lizzie realized that wasn't it. He was looking at her with concern, having sensed some part of her neediness. It was wonderful that he was so attentive, but the idea that she could have caused him any pain broke her heart. Is there anything you want to talk about? Well, at least the mouse isn't moving by itself right now. I am waiting to see if it does. Okay, my options are encourage him, bring up something else, ask indirectly, explain fully. Let's try to be open and honest. Well, there was this couple. She explained the encounter, hesitating a moment to give him her full thoughts, but eventually sharing. As expected, he wasn't disturbed by her fears and didn't tell her she was wrong. John had been through too much with her after all. You think it was nothing unusual? Judging for what you said, they just sound lonely to me. They probably just want to find people they have something in common with. Maybe. But even if that's true, I still don't want them anywhere near us. They're probably stupid, evil people, John. All we need is the two of us. Still good to have more social contact. In general, the music's been a lot more peaceful. No matter what, the music was absolutely amazing in the first game, but it's a lot more peaceful in this one. He smiled ruefully, but there was real affection and expression too. John pulled her into a quick embrace and squeezed her tight. If that's how you feel, we don't need to interact with other people. I kind of want to keep my head down and graduate anyway. I agree. She cuddled with him for a moment longer, nestling her head against his chest, then reluctantly pulled back, watching her hair as it clung to him. Though she longed to stay, she knew that it was better to go to class. Maximizing time in the short term would only hinder their long-term objectives, and she wanted as much of him as she could possibly get. I kind of want someone to feel that way about me. But that's just the crippling loneliness and depression. So, nothing important. Lizzie headed to their bedroom and traded one spiral notebook for another, feeling a moment of guilt at the deception, but no, it was better this way. She could take the burden onto herself and leave his light lighter. She left with a kiss and a cheery wave, but then crept around the side of the apartment. She had left a little earlier than necessary to arrive at class on time for this very purpose. From the perfect angle, she could see him through the window, going back to his book, studying so seriously to help them have a better life together. Lizzie didn't try to hide the broad smile on her face and just spent a while watching him. There was less need to watch him now that they were together, but she still enjoyed it. Once she had been observed, and the other girl had made this despicable assumption that Lizzie was concerned that he would cheat on her, as if such a thing was possible, and if she needed any reason except to look at him. She did like to observe him sometimes to make sure he wasn't sad again. John's depression was mostly under control now that they had abandoned the awful Koitek medicine, but she knew it was part of him that needed to be watched. The thought of his inner sadness made Lizzie want to run back inside and kiss him again, forget class, and just spend time making love until he looked only happy and relaxed. Reluctantly, Lizzie pulled away and headed toward the lecture hall. John was mentally healthy. He wouldn't forget about her love just because she was away for a little while. She made sure that. She arrived just a little late, but it was a relaxed university and no one cared too much. Lizzie carefully set out her books and focused on the lesson. There were worse things than classes. If the universe declared that she couldn't spend every single moment with him, she needed something else to fill her time. With a few exceptions, like psychology classes, weren't obnoxious at all. A few even provided knowledge that might have utility in the future. And if all of it had some utility, and getting them closer to their degree. Once it had been difficult for Lizzie to think about such long-term plans, but now she could see how both of them earning degrees would help them create the life they wanted. But after that, things became more tangled in her mind. She wanted to be with him. She wanted whatever he wanted, but he was convinced that they should take jobs in the industry, play some small role in preventing pharmaceutical giants like Koitek from doing anything as terrible as they'd done at their old high school, or the experiment they had done that led to Lizzie's existence. The idea that John wanted to make sure there would never be anyone else like her, that she would be the only one. It made her tingle all over. She didn't think he would approve of that thought, but she liked it so much that she kept it to herself. But the idea of getting involved with Koitik again, even indirectly, still left her. She wanted what he wanted, of course, a life together. They would have that no matter what. No matter what they chose, it would be fine. For once, Lizzie set such thoughts aside and focused fully on class. After the lecture finished, Lizzie practically skipped out of the hall. It had been her last class of the day, and John had likely finished the work that he needed to do in the computer lab. That left them the rest of the day to themselves. So, she wouldn't have to leave him again. Lizzie stopped by the store first. Since they were low on food, it hurt her pride as a cook that they had to eat ramen, but money was tight. The least she could do was purchase cheap vegetables and enhance the experience. As she picked up appropriate ones, Lizzie carefully kept track of the spending versus the amount of money she had left. She had aged out of child support. Not that the man who had impregnated her mother had ever been reliable, which combined with college expenses left her in a more difficult financial situation than ever before in her life. She was careful to add everything up in her head so that she still had enough money to drop by the pharmacy after getting the groceries. There was a small locally owned one where she felt comfortable getting John's depression medication, though it seemed to be getting more expensive these days. Of course, she did still own Abby's home in the hometown, but Lizzie wanted to avoid doing anything with it in case Koitik was watching, and John would never want to live there anyway. Perhaps after they graduated, she could sell the house for a down payment on their own. The idea gave her a pleasant hum of emotions as she finished her errands and headed back home, still with a spring in her step. But when Lizzie arrived, she found the door locked. She quickly pulled out her key, adding another scratch mark to the lock before successfully opening it. The apartment was empty, briefly making her heart hammer in her chest. There was a note on the table, and she seized it, eyes flickering over the words. John had gone to the computer lab and said he had hoped to be back before she was, but that it might be longer, so she had an explanation. But even as Lizzie breathed a sigh of relief, part of her mind began to chum with other thoughts. What if this was some kind of excuse? No, John would never do such a thing. Never. The music changed. Lizzie crumpled the paper in her hands, then nervously tried to smooth it out again. John would never betray her. She knew that now, carried that fact tightly in her heart. But the world was filled with awful people, terrible women, who might try to seduce him. And even if he pushed them away, the idea of one of them laying a hand on him. And what if Koitik got a hold of him somehow? They'd already tried it once, to use him to get it to her. She thought they were safe now, but what if she was wrong? Once, Lizzie might have flown out the door and hunted him down until she could be sure that he was safe. Now she found herself pacing, fingers tangling in her hair, as she tried to quiet the thoughts screaming in her head. On a whim, Lizzie grabbed the extra spiral notebook she'd taken and slammed it down on the table. She began furiously writing everything in her head, letting the thoughts out to give herself a little relief. She'd done this once before. She had met him, just like the collected pictures of him. Now that she had the real thing, she neglected such habits, but they helped her once. Perhaps they could again. Finally, she was done. Lizzie took a deep breath and looked over the page of furious scribbling. Some of the thoughts there embarrassed her. She needed to trust him utterly, but it was good to get them out of her head and onto paper. She felt calm again, and the memory wafted from the deep recesses of her soul. The place where she kept him, comforting her even now. Though the page was a mess, she had returned from the edge. Lizzie realized that she was gripping a knife in her other hand. After a pause, she set it down. Though her mind was clear, she still wasn't sure what to do. Obviously, John would never cheat on her. He had been very considerate to leave a note, and no doubt that explained the situation. It was also unlikely that anything terrible would happen to him. Still, she missed him, though, and wanted to go drown the rest of her fears in his presence. It was possible that he would be unhappy if his work had gone on too long, and might be happy to see her. Lizzie closed the notebook and put it with the others, considering what she should do. Well, start making dinner. It made her anxious not to take action, but Lizzie kept herself from leaving. Instead, she set about making dinner, trying to not watch the door and listen too closely for his arrival. Lizzie set about cutting up the vegetables, removing the bad portions and reducing the rest of the appetizing chunks. Her knife flickered, satisfying, perfectly balanced for her hand. They might need to make do in many ways, but she had excellent kitchen knives to work with. Even when money was tight, he had never suggested selling her knife collection. She would have gladly sold every knife and every single thing she owned for his sake. Knife still flying, Lizzie frowned to herself. No, that wasn't right. She needed her axe and a few knives to defend him properly. Plus, John wouldn't want her to give up everything like that. But it's nice that the sequel is like from her perspective. That's pretty cool. I like it. Considering such warm thoughts, Lizzie flipped her knife around her hand a few unnecessary times as she finished cutting. Not the kind of thing she could do in public, but at home there was no one to see her but John, and he wouldn't be afraid of her. It might be too early to cook anything, so Lizzie set the chopped vegetables aside and converted the rest into a salad. She smiled to herself but realized that she was out of preparation, so her gaze wandered toward the door. Fortunately, at that very moment, she heard his footsteps outside. Lizzie was torn between rushing to greet him and waiting by her work, which made her hesitate long enough for him to enter. Sorry, I got held back. That's no problem at all. I've gotten things ready for dinner. Looks like you've been busy. I'm really hungry. So is eating early fun? Of course. Since she'd done her preparations already, Lizzie just set the water on to boil and added a few other flourishes. John set the table, and she beamed at him, happy to be working together. Eventually, they both sat down together on opposite sides of the small table. It was nothing much, but it was theirs, and that was wonderful. She would have been happy to just watch him eat, but she knew that he loved to talk to her even more. The idea that he wanted her to open herself up to him, even her darkest thoughts, always made her happy. But for Day, she had nothing particularly dark on her mind. So, you implied that you got held up in the lab? Mostly it was nothing unusual. Just had to answer some questions, but Dan caught up with me at the end and wanted me to switch shifts at the library. He wanted me to do tonight, which I said I wouldn't work, so we had to do some weird rescheduling. Hasn't that been happening a lot lately? Yeah, and I might be picking up even more shifts. Figure it can't hurt, right? No, but she didn't like him to be away from home more often. Lizzie had to admit that the library job was a good one, allowing him to study or read most of the time, but she still didn't like it. At least she could visit him without it being a hindrance. Why did he feel the need to work so much, though? Lizzie had her own campus job, and the numbers of their debt weren't too awful thanks to scholarships. Would it be better if they could get rid of it? Maybe she should consider going back to the house and selling it after all. Though she considered asking him all those questions, Lizzie decided to hold back. John had many concerns of his own, and adding her anxiety to those might make him depressed again. She was stronger, so it was better for her to shoulder the burden. After dinner, they moved to the couch to work. It was a ratty old thing they had gotten off the curb, but it was fairly soft, and it served to hold them. They sat on opposite sides, each with their textbooks, their feet touching in between, just being able to be so near him. So comfortably, Lizzie slid her feet against his leg and gave a bright smile when he looked up at her. An old part of her wanted to act immediately, to have sex before the moment could pass. But they had been together for 2 years, and moments like this were hardly a rare thing. Slowly her mind had learned that she didn't need to be desperate. The life she wanted with him was filled with moments like this too. Despite her thoughts circling around him, Lizzie finished her work rather quickly. Because of it, in a sense, there was a purpose to so many activities that had once been just going through the motion. Lizzie saw he was still busy working and spent a little while admiring him. She loved that look of concentration as he became fully absorbed with something. It was even better when it was directly toward her, but just his concentration was cute too. She could have watched forever, but once she got her fill, Lizzie stood up, she kissed him on the cheek, and then headed to the other side of their apartment. They didn't have a lot of space, but there was enough for her to retrieve her axe from the cupboard and experiment for a little while. She had experienced more physical instability since the incident, leaving her protect. She need to be... Okay, guys, I think I'm at my limit for how long I can stay awake. So I want to keep recording, but I also am at the point that I'm going to pass out, and I can't force myself to stay awake. So I am going to end the recording here before I fall face first into the keyboard. Like I said, if you haven't watched the first Crimson Gray, then go back and check that out first, where you're playing for the protective Jaws. And everyone, good day and bye.